Sarah and Zelena's time at Oscuro Academy had come to an end, and now they stood at the edge of the city of Vacuo, ready to start the next step in their journey to become huntresses. Sarah, who had never been to a city this large before, was excited by all of the merchants and buildings surrounding her. Zelena, having grown up in Mistral, was much more impressed by the single building looming over them in the distance. Shade Academy, their new home for the next 4 years. Both of the characters, Seraphina, Vermillion, and Zelena Ray, as well as all of the members of Team Seraph, are characters created by myself, Phoenix Knight, but were brought to life through the artwork of Hoshi Oujo. Links in the description below to all of her socials, including her DeviantArt, her Twitter, and her YouTube channel, where she has speed paints of a lot of the different artwork that she has done. I highly encourage you to go check her out. Her artwork is incredible, and she deserves all of the praise for bringing these characters to life. If this is your first experience with the story of Team Seraph, I highly recommend starting from the beginning, as this is Chapter 5, and there's a lot of backstory that you might want to catch up on. I'll link the entire playlist up in the corner above if you guys wanted to start from the beginning, and possibly just get a refresher on the things that have happened in the past if it's been a while since you've watched. But with that being said, let's get on with the story. Upon arriving in Vacuo, Sarah had wanted to just run across the buildings to get to the academy faster, but Zelena advised against it. They already drew enough attention as is, probably best not to anger the locals on the first day. Sarah shrugged and followed her lead. But as they began to travel through the outer streets of the city, Zelena kept getting turned around. She had found a map of Vacuo on her scroll to help them find their way, but was dismayed to find that almost nothing matched her descriptions. The ever-changing environment of Vacuo caused the outskirts of the city to be rebuilt time and again, making any map essentially useless. As if her clothes weren't enough of a hint, trying to use a map in Vacuo was an easy way to tell that she wasn't native to the kingdom, and the locals took notice, glaring as she passed by. So much for not drawing attention, Zelena thought. Sarah, cheery as always, encouraged Zelena to pay them no mind. They had each other, after all, and that's all that really mattered. She agreed, but also noted how the disdain for other kingdoms was much more prevalent here than in the other settlements of the desert. In the end, they stumbled upon the main street of the market district, giving them a relatively straight path most of the way to the academy. After slowly inching through the busy crowd, they arrived at the outer walls of the school, and stopped to look up at the daunting structure towering over them. Sarah looked at Zelena, who was in awe of the sheer size of the building before her, and smiled. It was time to start the next part of their journey. Sarah grabbed Zelena's hand, and they stepped forward into their new home. Upon entering the academy grounds, they had been greeted by an upper-year student, tasked with directing new students through the academy. They were ushered into a large room with a sandy floor, where other new arrivals were already waiting, silently judging every person who entered the room. "Warm welcomes all around," Sarah said, a bit uneasy with the tense atmosphere. "Seems so," Zelena sighed. "Well, we'll just have to make the best of it," Sarah said, always the optimist, and Zelena agreed. After what seemed like hours of waiting, someone finally came to address them. It was a short woman, even compared to Zelena, with a deep tan wearing a long brown trench coat, studded with gold flecks on the outside. She introduced herself as Professor Rumpole, and told them all that their initiation would take place the following day. They would be given the details before the initiation began, and would be assigned dorm rooms afterwards. But for now, they would be given some provisions and remain in the hall until morning. So they'd best get comfortable. As expected, they were already having to rough it their first night. Preparations for long missions in the desert, no doubt, Zelena thought. Sarah had already found a spot next to the wall, and gestured for Zelena to join her. They both leaned up against it, and watched the other students get comfortable, as the professor suggested. Many students lined the walls, just as Sarah and Zelena had done. Some went right to the center of the room, boasting their confidence, while others simply fell asleep immediately. But none of them interacted with anyone they didn't already know. Everyone was evaluating each other, seeing them more as competition rather than classmates. As Sarah scanned the room, she was sure that most were simply putting on an act, not wanting to seem weak or intimidated, but there were a few who seemed like they were itching for a fight. Before long, Zelena had drifted off to sleep, leaning on Sarah's shoulder. Sarah couldn't help but chuckle to herself at how far Zelena had come. Falling asleep in a room full of strangers was something she could hardly imagine her doing back when they had first met. But now, she was out like a light. It was comforting to know how much Zelena trusted her. Sarah felt the same, and before long, she too felt her consciousness fade away. It was early in the morning while the room was still dark when Sarah awoke to the sound of nearby movement. She slowly opened her eyes to see where it was coming from, and saw the shadow of a person creeping closer. Without moving, she activated her semblance, just enough to cause her eyes to light up. The shadow stopped in its tracks as the person saw the glow of her orange eyes fixed upon them, piercing through the darkness. As she was staring down the shadow, it was apparent that Sarah had activated her semblance a little bit more than had intended, and had released a little bit of heat. Zelena, who had slid down onto Sarah's lap during the night, now stirred from her slumber. She could tell that Sarah had tensed up, and, as Zelena lifted her head, Sarah could see the faint glow of purple coming from her eyes as well. The person let out a gasp and scurried the other way, tripping over a number of sleeping students in the darkness. Well, everyone was waking up now, and just in time as they heard a booming voice that echoed through the room. "Good morning, students of Shade Academy! Could all first-year students please head to the meeting grounds atop the school for your initiation?" And with that voice still ringing in their ears, everyone headed up to the terrace. As the students all made their way, Sarah looked for the person who was moving during the night, wanting to know what they were up to. But whoever it was had already blended in with the crowd. Before they knew it, they were standing atop the academy in the meeting grounds, with all of the other students, just as the sun was beginning to rise over the horizon. Standing in front of them was a muscular man in a gray-blue cape, with Professor Rumpel standing at his side. Apparently, this was Headmaster Theodore. Looking at him, Zelena couldn't help but wonder how someone like that got put in charge. He definitely looked like he could handle himself as a huntsman, but didn't seem all that capable as a leader. As she was thinking, the man started riling up the crowd. Everyone who was wary of one another just moments ago were now cheering in unison. He definitely had the charisma of a leader, but the real secret to his leadership was easily seen. The much more professional-looking woman standing next to him, Professor Rumpel. With so much as clearing her throat, Theodore sighed and got to the point of the meeting. "Welcome, students, to your initiation," his voice boomed over the crowd. "Today you will be tested on your ability to survive as huntsmen and huntresses, and based on your performance, you will be put into 4-member teams." Zelena's heart sank. She knew they would be put into teams, but she had hoped it wouldn't be so immediate. The less people she had to deal with, the better. Sarah could see the disdain on Zelena's face, and put a hand on her shoulder to reassure her, which helped for the moment. "These ships will take you out to predetermined locations in the desert, and all you need do is make it back to the Academy alive." As he spoke, several ships arrived on the terrace. "Oh, is that all?" Zelena asked under her breath, trying to hide her displeasure with sarcasm, but her tongue still flicked with unease. As if to answer her words, Theodore added, "And one more thing. Your partners, who will be with you for the next 4 years, will be the first person you make eye contact with upon landing." "Good luck," Theodore said with a chuckle. And with that, the students started to make their way to the ships. Zelena's unease turned to panic as the students pushed between them, and she lost sight of Sarah. Her hands started sweating as the crowd began dragging her towards one of the ships. She looked around for Sarah, wondering what direction to push towards. She didn't want to even consider the possibility that the two of them wouldn't be on the same team. It was bad enough she was going to be stuck with 2 strangers already. If she ended up on a team without Sarah for 4 years... Zelena's mind started to swim with negative thoughts as she looked for Sarah, until she started hearing shouts from a short distance away, and then a shadow of a person passed overhead. A shadow with wings! Sarah had started hopping from shoulder to shoulder looking for Zelena, much to the annoyance of their classmates. Zelena tried calling out to her, but Sarah couldn't hear her over everyone else, and since Zelena was shorter than most, Sarah couldn't easily locate her either. Zelena was almost on board one of the ships, so in a last-ditch effort, she uncoiled one of her whips and extended it in the air towards where she saw Sarah's shadow. A moment later, she felt a tug as the crowd pushed her onto the ship. She pulled as hard as she could, and just before the doors closed, Sarah darted inside. "Made it," Sarah said with a goofy grin on her face. "Took you long enough," Zelena replied, breathing a sigh of relief. "You know, if you just grew a few more inches, maybe we wouldn't run into these kinds of situations," Sarah teased as she poked Zelena's cheek. "Oh yeah? Well, if you didn't always have your head in the clouds, maybe you wouldn't have lost me in the first place," Zelena retorted. "Is that so?" Both of them paused for a moment and then laughed. Their mood had been lightened a bit as the ship took off into the desert and their initiation began. Zelena found seats near the rear of the ship, wanting to savor the last few minutes of peace before being saddled with teammates. Sarah, on the other hand, who had never been on a ship before, was enjoying every minute. "These things fly really fast," Sarah exclaimed. "I wonder how far they're going to take us." "I don't know, but we've been flying for a few minutes already. I doubt we'd be able to see the city when we land by this point," Zelena replied. "No wonder they got us up so early then. It's going to take us all day to get back." Great, Zelena thought. Another whole day of trekking across the desert. They had just spent days traveling to get to shade, and now they had to do it all over again. "It's a shame we can't see where they're taking us. Don't ships normally have windows?" Sarah asked as she got up from her seat to inspect the hatch they had boarded from. "They do, but I guess this is part of the initiation, not knowing where we'll end up. Either that, or the only ships Vacuo could get from Atlas were cargo ships," Zelena said, getting up from her seat to join Sarah. "Ah, right. These were made by Atlas." In her excitement, Sarah had forgotten where these ships had originated from. "Have you ever met anyone from Atlas?" Sarah asked. "I haven't, but from everything I've heard since moving here, Atlas is less liked than Mistral, and even I don't like Mistral." Zelena thought for a moment and then added, "But since we're using these ships, it seems the academies have some good relations at least." "I've been told the same things all my life. The other kingdoms took everything Vacuo had and gave us nothing in return, Atlas doing the most damage out of all of them. Because of that, we've been taught to dislike and distrust anyone from other kingdoms without ever interacting with them ourselves," Sarah said somberly. "Given everything Vacuo has been through because of the other kingdoms, can you really blame them?" Zelena asked. "No, I can't. But I also think people should be judged based on who they are, not where they come from," Sarah replied, remembering how a neighboring tribe full of complete strangers had not only taken in the survivors of her tribe when they were attacked by Grimm, but also helped save her life. "I suppose if you didn't think that way, you never would have given me the time of day when we first met. And now look at us," Zelena chuckled. "Exactly!" Sarah exclaimed. A cheery smile once again spread across her face. "So, if we ever meet someone from Atlas, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves now. Atlas has that reputation for a reason, and personally, I'm not all that eager to start meeting new people in general. Besides, before focusing on others, we need to make sure we stick together. You do still want to be partners, right?" Zelena teased as she turned to head back to the seat. "Of course! I'll make sure not to let you out of my sight." Zelena, who was a few paces ahead of Sarah, felt a rush of air from behind her as Sarah's words were cut short. Zelena turned to see what had happened, and was met with an open hole where Sarah once stood. A hatch had opened in the floor. Zelena darted to the edge of the opening and looked down to see Sarah tumbling end over end through the sky, apparently just as shocked as Zelena was that she was no longer on the ship. It didn't take long for Sarah to correct herself, open her wings, and turn her chaotic descent into a graceful glide. She may not have been able to take off on her own, but with a little boost in altitude, her wings could still take her far. Zelena pinched the bridge of her nose and let out an exasperated sigh. The initiation had barely begun, and it was already this stressful. She hoped this wasn't a hint at what the next 4 years would be like, but she didn't have time to worry about that. Students were rushing past her, diving out of the hatch, and so, not wanting to get too far from her friend, Zelena too leapt out of the plane to start her descent into the desert. Zelena squinted against the rush of air as she was falling, trying to see where Sarah was. It didn't take long for her to locate the only person not plummeting to the ground, instead gently circling the area where the students were dropping. Realizing that Sarah was waiting for her to land, Zelena tucked in her arms and accelerated towards a location away from the other students. As the ground was fast approaching, Zelena spread her arms and uncoiled her steno, holding the head of the red whip with both hands in front of her. She angled her body and activated the wind dust, causing a burst of air to rush forth, propelling her perpendicular to the ground, which slowed her descent. After 2 more bursts, Zelena somersaulted and landed both feet firmly in a flurry of sand stirred up by the last pulse of wind. She used her hand to shield her eyes from the blinding sun as she looked for Sarah. Just as she did so, a shadow flew overhead once again. And, after a perfectly executed mid-air backflip, the person swiftly landed directly in front of Zelena. And as they stood, Zelena was now looking eye to eye with her new partner. "Show off," were the first words Zelena spoke to Sarah after she landed. It's not often I get to fly. I need to take the chance when I can, Sarah rebuked, satisfied with her landing. I suppose that's true. She knew that Sarah yearned to fly, and Zelena loved seeing how happy it made her. Though, I'd still only give it a 7 out of 10. You have the landings down pat, but your takeoffs could use some work, Zelena teased. Aw, come on, how was I supposed to know they were going to just drop us like that? Sarah complained. Zelena laughed as they started to make their way towards the marker now appearing on their scrolls. After traveling across open desert for what seemed like hours now, the city was still nowhere in sight. Just how far did they drop us? Do they really expect some of us to die out here? Zelena bemoaned, panting from the heat, her hood up to protect from the blazing sun. If it wasn't for her aura, she would have passed out already. But without any provisions, the heat was still taking its toll. Sarah checked her scroll. Based on how far we've traveled, we're just over halfway to our target location. Ugh, this is gonna be the death of me, Zelena continued. It is pretty rough to hold the initiation in the middle of the day, Sarah couldn't help but agree. Even though they had just spent the last couple of days traveling to get to the city of Vacuo in the first place, much of that traveling had been done during the early mornings and evenings to avoid the most brutal times of day. For even the most veteran of Vacuans, this was certainly a trial of endurance. But I'm sure we'll pull through, and if you get tired, I can always piggyback you, Sarah offered, but Zelena's reply was swift. No thanks. Much to Sarah's surprise. Your semblance may regulate your body heat, but if I'm on your back, all it will do is cook me faster. I guess that's true, Sarah said, a bit dejected that she'd be of no help. Then how about over there? Sarah offered, noticing a ravine nearby. The only thing nearby, really, outside of the billowing sand. Zelena readily agreed, and they made their way to the edge of the chasm. The chasm was the remnant of an old dust mine, a permanent scar upon the land, a constant reminder of the greed of other kingdoms. It had been created through terrace mining, and looking down, they could faintly see the first level through the light of the sun. Everything beyond was a black abyss. Sarah had arrived at the edge of the cliff a few steps ahead of Zelena, who was sluggish from exhaustion. Looks to be about a 50-foot drop. Getting down there is easy enough, but climbing back up is gonna be... Sarah's words were cut short. Zelena, who had just caught up, hobbled straight off the edge of the cliff, without saying a word, much to Sarah's surprise. Sarah instinctively leapt after her, thinking she missed the edge in her exhaustion and fell. But before Sarah could reach her, Zelena kicked off the wall, and once again, using her wind dust, landed safely on the sand. You nearly scared me half to death with that stunt. I thought you fell, Sarah exclaimed. Sorry, Zelena replied, genuinely concerned about upsetting Sarah. I didn't mean to worry you, I just really wanted to get to the shade. Apology accepted, Sarah said with a huff. Tell me when you're going to do something like that next time. Communication is crucial, especially now that we'll be part of a team. Right. I'll keep that in mind, Zelena said, a bit dejected, remembering that this was the last time it would be just the two of them. Well, that's something we have 4 years to work on, so no rush, I suppose, Sarah replied. Noticing the change in Zelena's demeanor, she decided to change the subject. This place is pretty massive. Their eyes had started to adjust to the lower light levels, and the rest of the chasm came into view. There were cracks and holes in the wall where dust had been removed, and structures of abandoned machinery were visible along both sides of the gorge. Looking down towards the middle, they could see 2 more levels below, reaching deep into the land. Luckily, the mine ran in the general direction of the city, so they began making their way once more. As they walked, Zelena was able to cool down, but both of their hearts began to sink as the chasm kept going, crawling its way along the land. This place is horrible, Zelena said. They came and took everything they could, and once they were done, they couldn't even be bothered to take their crap with them? All of this abandoned equipment, just leaving the cleanup for the locals. The other kingdoms, or at least their leaders, are despicable. Sarah couldn't help but agree with Zelena's sentiment. She remembered what she had said earlier about giving every person a chance, but in the face of all of this, she couldn't help but feel resentment for the other kingdoms as well. They continued walking for a while, neither of them finding the words to break the solemn atmosphere, but it didn't stop something else from changing it for them. In the silence of the ravine, they heard the scraping of rocks a short distance away, as if part of the cliffside had broken apart. Both Sarah and Zelena stopped in their tracks, their hands now on their weapons. Scanning the darkness for the source, they heard the sound again. It was coming from the level below. This was where their test truly began. They had proved that they could handle the desert, give or take, and now they needed to show how they handled the monsters lurking within it. The Grimm. They were ready, or at least Zelena thought they were, until a screech pierced their ears. It was a ravager. Zelena uncoiled her whips, ready to face it, but when she glanced at her partner, she noticed Sarah's hands began to tremble. Remembering what Sarah had told her about her past, Zelena quickly grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her behind a nearby crane, one of the many scattered along the edges of the mine on each level. It had been years since Sarah had been trapped in that burning building with the ravager, but the scars remained, both physical and mental. She'd faced ravagers since then, but always with a larger group, and never in a place this enclosed. Zelena peered from behind the crane to see a red wing stretch over the cliffside. The ravager had climbed up from the lower level to theirs, but it hadn't noticed them yet. It would soon sense Sarah's apprehension, though, if something wasn't done. Zelena pulled back behind the crane and talked with a soft voice. "Don't force yourself. We don't have to fight. There's still time to escape." "No, I need to be able to do this. If I can't, I'll only hold you back," Sarah said, frustrated that her body wasn't listening to her, holding to her arms to try to calm herself, but to no avail. "You should know by now that it's impossible for you to hold me back. We help each other forward, remember? And now it's up to me to lift you up. Here, let's try this," Zelena said, turning to face Sarah. She reached over and touched Sarah's cheek, turning her head so they made eye contact. As they did, Zelena activated her semblance. Thanks to Sarah's help over the past few years, Zelena had grown much more accustomed to her semblance, and had learned how to use it in different ways. If she flickered it on and off while making eye contact with someone, she was able to subject them to the emotional part of her semblance without completely disorienting them with an illusion. Though it was a bit disorienting to Zelena herself, very similar to blinking very fast in quick succession. But the calming emotion that she tried to project onto Sarah had done the trick. Sarah reached up, placing her hand over Zelena's, and smiled. The shaking had stopped. She breathed in deeply and exhaled. "Thank you, Zelena. I'm good now." "Any time," Zelena smiled back. The ravager had made its way to the other side of the crane they were hiding behind. "You ready?" Zelena asked. "Let's go," Sarah replied, and without wasting a moment, she began hopping up the side of the crane as Zelena went around. Sarah reached the top and saw the ravager. It was a large one, its wingspan stretching at least 40 feet. It noticed her movement right away, turning to face its prey, spreading its red leathery wings wide and preparing to take flight. Upon meeting its eye, Sarah's mind threatened to pull her back to that burning building, but the sight of her friend kept her grounded. While the ravager's attention was on Sarah, Zelena ran behind it, and in one swift motion she uncoiled her whips and struck the ravager's wings, preventing its takeoff. The ravager screeched at the pain, which gave Sarah the opening to strike. She wasted no time and leapt at the Grimm, plunging her blades deep into its abdomen. Before the Grimm could react, Sarah ignited the fire dust in her blades, and as a plume of fire spouted from the ravager's mouth, it faded away into dust. "Well, that wasn't so bad," Sarah said, her voice still a little rattled. "Not too bad at all for our first Grimm as students of Shade Academy," Zelena said, trying to keep Sarah's mind at ease. But that sentiment didn't last long. No sooner had they thought the battle was over, multiple shrieks reverberated through the gorge. The girls covered their ears from the noise, as dozens of ravagers burst forth from the lower levels of the mine. The ravager they had killed was just the scout, and its bellow had called its friends. They just woke up the whole nest. Sarah and Zelena stood back to back as they readied their weapons. "Looks like running would have been the right choice after all," Sarah called to Zelena. "No kidding," Zelena responded. They were trapped 50 feet below ground with no cover and no strategy. Zelena had no idea how they were going to make it out. "Any ideas?" she asked her partner. "Just one. On my signal, head for the wall." Sarah didn't really have to wait long for an opening as one of the winged creatures dove at them, talons outstretched. "Now!" Sarah yelled, as they broke apart to avoid the Grimm and began running towards the wall of the cavern. They alternated between running and providing cover fire, Sarah with the daggers on her wings, and Zelena attacking with her whips, freezing the wings of nearby ravagers. The wall was less than 100 feet away, but it felt like a mile. Still, they were able to make it unscathed. "All right, what now?" Zelena asked. "Time to hitch a ride," Sarah replied. "Pardon?" Zelena questioned, grasping Sarah's intent but hoping she misheard. Zelena wanted to protest, but she could see that there was probably no other way. And besides, it's not like there was much time to argue. Making it to the wall had slowed the Ravager's advance, but it didn't stop it. Another Ravager barreled in, raking its talons along the wall, gnashing its jaws as they dodged out of the way. Sarah kicked off the wall, hollering to her partner, "Zelena!" And she knew exactly what Sarah had intended for her to do, as they had done many times before. Zelena held the head of her whip in her hand and pointed it directly at Sarah, who had leapt into the air above her. She activated her wind dust and sent Sarah soaring above the Ravagers. Sarah quickly located one of the larger ones that was close to Zelena, and dove towards it before it had a chance to notice her. She stabbed her blade into the shoulder of the Grim as she landed on its back, causing it to scream in pain and drop in altitude, just enough for it to be within reach of her friend. Zelena propelled herself off the wall as another Ravager dove in. She kicked off its head, sending it to the ground, and used her blue whip to snare the leg of the Ravager Sarah was riding. As soon as Zelena did so, Sarah twisted the blade in the Ravager's back, causing it to bellow once again and take towards the sky. The Ravager shot out of the chasm in a chaotic flight, trying to shake its unwanted passengers. They were out of the darkness of the mine, but they weren't the only ones. More than a half a dozen Ravagers had followed them, and they were gaining fast. After they climbed almost as high as they had been in the airship, the Ravager had had enough of company, and turned violently in the air, causing Zelena's whip to loosen and let go. As it did, Zelena pulled it back and began falling towards the other Ravagers. She used her wind dust to dodge the fangs and claws of the 4 closest Grim, stabilizing herself in time to face the 3 remaining Ravagers that were lagging behind. Zelena rotated mid-air, nimbly dodging the bite of one of them, and wrapped her Euryale around its neck, using her momentum to swing onto its back. She activated the ice dust, freezing its head as a second Ravager attacked. Zelena jumped into the sky once more, avoiding its claws, causing the Ravager to shatter the head of its frozen friend, killing it in the process. She used this opportunity to attack the second Ravager. Using the fangs of her whips, she shredded and burned the leathery red wings of the beast, sending it plummeting to the desert below. The third Ravager also didn't waste its chance to attack either, trying to sink its teeth into Zelena as its friends perished. But as Zelena narrowly avoided the attack, the Ravager only succeeded in ensnaring both of Zelena's whips in its jaws. As it did so, she looked up to see the remaining 4 Ravagers had stopped following Sarah, and instead chose to dive after her. A bead of sweat rolled down Zelena's brow. With her weapons trapped, she was a sitting duck for the other Grim. But even in this seemingly dire situation, she couldn't help but grin. The Ravagers, whose black forms threatened to blot out the sun itself, were being overshadowed by one who would shine even brighter. Zelena used the lightning dust to electrocute the Ravager from inside its mouth, causing it to crumple and begin to fade. As Zelena began to fall, she used a gust of wind from her whip to push the Ravagers back, creating some distance between the Grim and herself, while also giving her partner a clear path to attack. Sarah had made her move. Following right after Zelena, she had plunged her blades into the nape of the Ravager she was riding, spreading her wings wide and doing a reverse dive off of it as it turned to dust. Sarah paused in the middle of her backwards arc for a brief moment to align her targets. She then folded her wings close, minimized her surface area, and dove straight towards the Ravagers at breakneck speed. At the last moment, she unfurled her wings, sending herself into a spiral. The Ravagers didn't have a chance to react. In one swift motion, Sarah's blades, cloaked in flame, cleaved through the torsos of the winged creatures, ending the battle in an instant. Sarah's speed sent her darting past Zelena, and as Zelena turned to see, Sarah spread her wings, sheathed her weapons, and caught Zelena in her arms. They had won. Somehow. "Good job with the takeoff this time. Much less chaotic," Zelena chided. "Says the one who jumped first," Sarah chimed back, as the 2 of them glided in the direction of the city. "I don't know if I'd necessarily call that jumping first," Zelena chuckled. Sarah laughed as well. "Either way, let's not do that again," Sarah said, pulling Zelena close, her arms shaking slightly from the experience. Zelena placed her hand on Sarah's arm to reassure her as they continued to glide. This was the first time she was truly able to see the sky from Sarah's perspective. Watching the world float by, feeling the brisk wind on her face, the only sound being that of the wind in her ears. It was wonderful. Zelena now truly understood why her friend had such a deep love of flying. They went as far as they could with the altitude they had, and cut out a good portion of walking time. The air made for much easier terrain than sand, and Zelena was disappointed they were now going back to trudging through the desert. Sarah checked her scroll. We're almost there, and then we can finally relax. I hope so, Zelena responded. She knew that meant it was almost time to get shoved into a permanent room with strangers. Nothing relaxing about that. But she kept that thought to herself. After walking for so much as 5 minutes from where they had landed, they heard another loud noise, as sand erupted from behind a sand dune. With adrenaline still pumping from their last encounter, they both tensed, prepared for another fight. Had they started another Grim? How many was it? Would they be able to make it through another fight? All of these questions, but the answer they got was something neither of them expected. Out of that plume of sand, something did come flying to greet them, but it was no Grim. Flailing through the sky was a boy. A fellow student, perhaps? Sarah thought. They both watched as he careened towards the sand dune, clipping the top of it, which sent him into a chaotic spiral as he rolled towards them. Sarah and Zelena winced every time he hit the ground as he skipped across the desert, eventually coming to a stop some 20 feet away from them. Something had launched him hard, and now he wasn't moving. You think he's dead? Zelena asked as they walked over to see. He seems to still be breathing, Sarah responded, kneeling down to check. Judging by his weapons, he's one of our classmates. If it was a Grim that sent him flying, I think we should probably get moving before it comes to finish the job. Zelena had had enough excitement for one day and just wanted the initiation to end. And just leave him lying here? Sarah asked, surprised Zelena would suggest that. I'm not that cruel, but he can handle his own problems, Zelena said, uncoiling her blue whip and touching the tip of its fangs to the boy's neck. With a quick pulse of her aura, a jolt of electricity sent the boy shooting to his feet, with a look of complete shock on his face and a spark or two sizzling in his hair. You enjoyed that, didn't you? Sarah asked her grinning friend. It's his fault for taking a nap in the middle of the desert, Zelena retorted, indeed pleased with herself. Sarah rolled her eyes and turned towards their new acquaintance. You doing all right? Sarah asked the dazed boy. The boy blinked his eyes, trying to adjust to the light, as if he had just been in total darkness. He squinted at the person talking to him, and as his vision returned, his face lit up. Hey, you're that girl with wings, the boy said. Wow, how observant. He's fine. Can we go now? Zelena snipped, her tongue flicking in annoyance. Oh, you're both Faunus, the boy exclaimed. Zelena gave him a look that said, yeah? And? But the boy didn't really know how to respond. Sensing the tension, Sarah tried to change the subject. So, you need any help? What with the explosion and getting knocked out and all that? The boy looked surprised at her words, shaking his head as though he had just remembered something. Oh, no, I'm good. I can take care of it. Don't worry. Thanks for your help, though, he said as he quickly turned and started back over the sand dune. Oh, I'm Piers, by the way. See you around. And with that, he was gone just as quickly as he'd arrived. Okay then, I guess. See ya, Sarah said, understandably confused by the encounter. Good riddance, Zelena said with a huff. Zelena, you know you don't have to be so rude to people. He was nice, and we're gonna have teammates anyways, so we may as well hope for someone kind. Yeah, I know, but he got knocked out in the middle of the initiation. Doesn't seem like someone who would make a solid teammate if you ask me. I don't know. I think there was more to it than that, Sarah said, still thinking something else was off. Besides, there's something about him in particular that just doesn't sit right with me, Zelena said, steadfast in her rejection of him as a potential teammate. Well, I suppose we don't get to choose our last two teammates anyways, so no point in worrying about it. Sarah shrugged and left it at that, continuing the journey towards their goal. And, after another 10 minutes of traveling, the city of Vacuo came into view on the horizon. Not much longer, and their trek through the desert would be over. Or so it would seem. Out of the corner of her eye, Sarah saw something else in the distance. Another plume of sand, except this one was moving, and moving fast at that. As she pointed it out to Zelena, both of them paused to look as the dust cloud grew larger. It was heading in the same direction they were traveling, towards the city. "What do you think that is?" Sarah asked. "Only things it could be is either a Grimm or one of our classmates, right?" "Actually, I think it's both," Sarah exclaimed as she held her hand over her eyes to get a better look. "What do you mean?" Zelena asked. "I can see someone running from the cloud, so it has to be a Grimm chasing them, I'd imagine." "Probably. You don't think anyone would be dumb enough to lead a Grimm to this city, would they?" As they watched the cloud start to pass by them, it took a sharp right and began heading directly towards them. Nope. They're coming towards us now." "What do you mean? Why would they do that?" Zelena asked, a bit frantic. "They're waving at us." "What?" "Oh, it's Piers, that guy from earlier. I think he wants us to help him." "Him? He didn't want our help before. Why should we help him now?" No sooner than she said it, the boy picked up speed and bolted between them, sliding to a halt just behind Sarah and Zelena, gasping for breath. "Girl, chasing, Grimm, crazy!" Neither of them really understood what he was saying, but as they turned back towards the impending cloud of sand, the meaning of his words became clear. "I don't think we have much of a choice now," Sarah exclaimed. Through the dust, they saw a towering giraffe charging towards them. Standing over 30 feet tall, it was small compared to the ones they had learned about in class, so it wouldn't be able to swallow them whole, but that wouldn't stop it from trying. Two of its heads gnashed at Sarah and Zelena, forcing them to dodge out of the way, while its middle head was turned around, seemingly preoccupied with something else. As Sarah jumped to the left to avoid the Grimm's bite, she swore she could hear the sound of laughter between the boom of the Grimm's footsteps. She looked back as the giraffe passed by and saw someone else locked in combat with the monster. On its back was a girl with long purplish-pink hair clashing against the third head of the Grimm, nimbly dodging the jaws trying to get her. Her mouth was stretched into a wild grin, and she was cackling between every strike she landed against her opponent. She was enjoying herself. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Their initiation wasn't over just yet. But the remainder of Team Seraph's initiation will have to wait until the next chapter, when Team Seraph will finally come together. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this story. Since it has been a while since I've put out the last chapter, make sure to let me know how my storytelling is going. I tried to make this chapter a little bit more detailed and fluid compared to the other ones, as it's pretty much the start of Team Seraph's story and is going to be continuing a lot more fluidly from here on out, rather than the last few chapters that were skipping, months and years at a time. So please let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. And if you want to see more of Team Seraph's story, make sure to subscribe so you know right away when the next chapter comes out, as well as the reveals for the last two characters, the last two members of Team Seraph, which will be coming out soon. So make sure to subscribe and join the Guild of the Eternal Flame. Tweet me at PhoenixKnight7, and I'll see you guys in the next video.